Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dan Porterfield, president of the Aspen Institute.
Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the afternoon of conversation in this 2025 Aspen Ideas Festival. It's such a joy to be with all of you here in the Klein Music Tent. Let me begin by offering a few words of gratitude. First, to our Board of Trustees and especially our chair, Margot Pritzker, here with her husband, Tom. Thank you to the Aspen School Music Festival and School, led by Alan Fletcher, who is here. Thank you, Alan. Thank you to our generous underwriters and our patron pass holders, our speakers, our Bezos scholars, our fellows, our volunteers, our Institute staff. All these people, an incredible team led by Executive Vice President Jin-Hee Kim and Festival Executive Producer Graham Veazey. Thank you all. This is the Aspen Institute's 75th anniversary year. It was right here on these grounds that our story began in the aftermath of World War II, with the world still wobbling like a top. Our first Aspen Ideas Festival, a 3-week convening organized by Walter and Elizabeth Pepke and featuring Albert Schweitzer, was premised on the idea that dialogue, literature, music, and great ideas would nourish our spirits and strengthen our societies in perilous times. That 1949 convening was the big bang that brought the Aspen Institute into existence. In the 75 years since, we have grown into a global nonprofit with programs, partners, fellowships, and festivals here in Aspen and all around the planet. This is our home base. We are so proud to be here with you today for this outstanding program. As we've expanded to include more and more people around the world, from Tulsa to Los Angeles to Kyiv, our purpose has stayed the same. We seek to ignite human potential, to build understanding and promote new possibilities for a better world. Our methods, too, have stood the test of time and powered this expansion. We seek to spark dialogue, elevate ideas, enable solutions, and build communities of public-spirited citizens like all of you who aspire to live, give, and grow together. Thank you for being here and for believing in the power of ideas. And now, to kick off our program, please join me in welcoming the renowned artist Jeff Koons, who will be in dialogue with Melissa Chiu, who directs the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden at the Smithsonian Institution. Thank you all. Thank you, Melissa. Jeff, thank you so much for being here, Jeff. Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Yes.
Welcome to the Big Tent. So honored to be here with Jeff Koons, who needs absolutely no introduction.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Jeff and I have a little bit of history together, and certainly with the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden. His work, one of the works that we'll show to you today, Kip & Co. from 1987, is in our collection and on display in the museum right now. He also helped us celebrate our 50th anniversary last year and was one of those wielding a shovel for the groundbreaking of our brand new sculpture garden that will open next year, which will help us to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So we have a bit of stuff together, and today we wanted to have a bit of a conversation about culture, but obviously grounded in Jeff's amazing work. So one of my first questions to Jeff was really about the fact that he's an artist who really has a practice dating 40 years, if not more. Longer, actually, because I learned that he was drawing at age 3. So we could say you might have been a little precocious relating to art. But my question to you is really about how your approach to art practice has enabled you to be so consistent. You know, there are very few artists, I think, who are able to keep making work at the kind of same level as you have been able to. So what is it about that, you know, how do you do that?
Melissa, it's the joy of art. I enjoy the feelings and the sensations that are generated. And I started when I was really young. My parents gave me kind of a pat on my back and made me kind of feel a sense of identity through art. And eventually I ended up going to art school. And I understood when I started to receive art history lessons, how the arts really connect you so effortlessly to the rest of the human disciplines, to philosophy and psychology, aesthetics, physics, all the human disciplines. And so the absolute kind of joy of that, and just that I could be a dilettante. And I know a lot of times that word has negative associations, but it was so wonderful that all of a sudden I had possibilities in my life. I could become. And so I learned how to become, and I learned how to kind of control my own biology, that I could create feelings and sensations through the images and the colors that I would work with. And then I think that I learned how to also communicate that with other people. And I always wanted to be part of a group. And so when you're young, you think about maybe the avant-garde, but when you start to create these feelings and sensations, people that feel kind of likewise are automatically kind of attuned to the type of work that you're doing.
So I think joy is an important thing to talk about right now.
I think joy is important, but becoming, the idea to continue to try to take advantage of every moment. I mean, I'm so thrilled to be here with you, with this audience, but to take advantage of that moment, to enjoy this moment, to be alive, and to continue to make my own personal life as vast as possible, but then to communicate, to kind of assume the responsibility to serve, to communicate with others how the arts experience in any manner, how everybody can benefit from experience, to open ourselves to life.
So I think you talked just now about the moment, trying to stay in the moment, and this idea of becoming. And I wonder if you can talk about how you kind of are able to keep in the zeitgeist, because to sustain a practice for as long as you have to be thinking about what else is going on around you and the world, or is it a case where it's just you and your practice in the studio?
You know, it's kind of interesting because I don't know if I'm always in the zeitgeist, but you know, I feel very metaphysical moments, and I feel that I can get ahead of time, and that I can be thinking about things, and then, you know, notice that a little later it starts to become a little more prevalent in our culture. But the connectivity that the human disciplines, everything gives us, are opening ourselves up to life. I always enjoy bringing up the philosopher of John Dewey. And John Dewey will speak about communication as, in the most simple form, you can think of kind of a single-cell organism being affected by its environment. And it changes, it transforms, but then as a different organism, now it has an effect in return on the environment. And this back and forth is true communication. And that's the way the arts work for me, in opening up oneself to one's environment. If I speak in just a simple manner of how I've tried to achieve that, it's by removing guilt and shame. And guilt and shame of my own cultural history, my background.
What does that mean? What do you mean by that?
Well, all of us, we have histories, and we can't change those histories. They're our platform, and they're our foundation. But what keeps us from opening ourselves up to the world? What keeps us fearful of the experiences? So I always try to remove judgment. I try to remove any form of segregation. I try to be open to everything. And I found that self-acceptance was a prerequisite, first to do that. And then automatically, when you accept yourself, the last place you want to be is just in here. You want to be outside in the world. You want to be interacting. You want more information coming in. And when you open yourself up to the world, to your interests, and just focus on your interests, time and space bend. And it's a zeitgeist, whether it's of just this moment, but it's of a moment, constant moment, where time and space bend, and you become involved in a universal vocabulary. And I don't think it ever fails.
Yeah, I mean, the way that you're speaking is almost as if you're thinking about the audience for your work. It's as if you're thinking about the audience for your work as you are in that creation process. Can you talk about that? Do you know, not all artists, when they make work, think necessarily about the audience that is going to see, or the visitor that's going to see that artwork. Are you thinking about that at all?
I'm thinking about myself, and
that's what I mean. So, I mean, because it often, the impulse to create is often a very internalized one.
But there is, in the beginning area, there is a selfishness of experience, of wanting to become and to transcend. But at the same time, once you've experienced transcendence, and we all have in different ways, you automatically want to assume kind of the responsibility to share that with others. And it's, I think it's a common thing. It's like if you think back in human history, maybe when we were hunter-gatherers, but when you're a hunter and you learn that you can, you know, get enough hares to take care of yourself, then you want to go hunting for mammoth so you can take care of the whole community. And so I think of wanting to share as more of a responsibility, a communal responsibility, a generosity, because I love all the generosity that I receive from the rest of the community, everything that the world and people have to offer.
Yeah, I think as part of what we do in the museum at the Hirshhorn, you know, we think of ourselves as serving a public, as serving the public in terms of sharing our collection, serving the public, meaning being open to all visitors 364 days a year on the National Mall, of being free to all. I think that for us drives most of what we do, and then trickles down into the work that we show, meaning the exhibitions and how we curate the collection, and then how we speak about the collection, the wall texts, the educational programs, all of that. So I think it is, for many artists, that impulse to make is one that is very singular, but then the work goes out into the world. And so I wonder how you think about that. We talked earlier today about, how you feel when you see your work amongst many of the collections here in Aspen. I think it's one of the highest critical mass of Jeff Koons works in the country, one of. And so, how do you feel about that when you see your works out there in the world, private or public collections?
I feel honored.
Yeah.
Because I've always just wanted to participate. So just recently I was in Greece, and on the way home we had a stopover in Zurich. Mm-hmm. And I was with my family. We went to a sandwich shop. And my one son said, "Dad, look up there." And it was a sandwich in the shape of a balloon dog. Mm-hmm. And so, that's meaningful to me, because it feels like if I've in some manner been able to open things up to people, that they can look at things in a slightly different way, that's meaningful.
Well, that's an impact on culture, right?
Well, but I mean, Melissa, as a director of the museum, right now you've been working on being able to regenerate the sculpture garden, and this is going to have a huge impact. And this is kind of a conceptual idea. I know that you brought in the artist Hiroshi Sugimoto, but this is really kind of your conceptual idea, isn't it? That to be able to have the garden be located on the mall, and so how do you think this could affect the Hirshhorn Museum?
Well, I think it will have a transformational impact on our museum. So when I first joined the museum, we were able to kind of increase the attendance. We doubled it to close to 1 million visitors. But our sculpture garden facing the National Mall was only at 150,000 visitors. And yet there are 35 million visitors on the mall. So there was something that didn't quite work with the equation. And so we began to think about the sculpture garden as the reorientation of the museum towards where all those national visitors are on the mall. And so we invited Hiroshi Sugimoto to do just that, which is to design a space that welcomes those millions of visitors on the National Mall into our sculpture garden and then into the museum. So it links our campus in a very unique way. And so our belief is that many of the visitors on the mall may never have been to a modern art museum before, but they will see modern artworks from the mall, and our hope is that they would come into the museum via the sculpture garden. So when it opens next year, it will be 10 years of design and public approvals. And our hope is that even if we change one child or adult's view of modern art, maybe they want to even become an artist, then we will have done our work. So it's really for us about this idea of full accessibility to modern contemporary art. Yeah. And we're happy to have your Kip & Co. work in the sculpture garden at the very entrance. So, yeah. I'd love for us to see the image here. This is actually the balloon dog that you were speaking of. And I wanted to tell a story about a visit to Jeff's studio some years back, because it is the idea of beauty and perfection that has always been intrinsic to art history. And so many years ago, we visited with Jeff at his studio, and some of you might know, and you'll see some of the images, the gazing ball works, which are much like this surface, gazing balls that were actually part of a popular culture, but Jeff began to create them, and we'll see some images later. But you held up a gazing ball in your hand and you said, "See this gazing ball? It's really not right." And of course, to all of us untrained, even myself, an untrained eye, you spoke of the imperfections in its surface. And so I'd love to for you to talk a little bit more about how you drive towards that idea of perfection, because these surfaces are incredible when you see them in the flesh. And how do you do it? I mean, it's a philosophical, but it's also a material issue.
I have 8 children. And when I was speaking recently with my 6 younger children, I mentioned to them maybe about 6 months ago that if I could communicate anything to them as a parent, I hope that I could communicate caring. And even as an artist, I hope that the act of caring, because I don't think you can give more to the world than to care, and to care for the people around you, to care for your environment, to be aware of the effect that you have on things. So when I was holding up that gazing ball,
which you see here,
and speaking about it, it would have been just that I would never want somebody to come and look at the piece and see that imperfection and feel let down, because I want to continue that and suspend that abstraction, that belief in the experience for as long as possible. And so I remember one of the first times that I realized this commitment, I made a piece called Bob Hope. And it was a small piece. I made it in 1986. I was working with a foundry. And I went, and when I picked up the piece, I realized they didn't cast the bottom of the sculpture. And why didn't you cast the bottom? It was just open. And they said, well, nobody's going to see it. Well, I said, whoever has it is going to pick it up. And they're going to feel, I didn't care enough to finish that piece. So I'm not a perfectionist. I don't believe in losing energy, a dog chasing its tail, but I do care. And it's to try to be as generous as possible.
And then materially, because I know you're often experimenting many times over just to get the right patina, the right shine. How do you encourage your team, because you often work with companies, to do things that they may think are beyond them? How do you let them know?
I think that we attract people around us that have similar interests. So a lot of my team, the average person has been with me at least 20 years at this point. Some people have been with me, 30-some years, 30, 35 years. So they know the way that I think about things, but I'm very hands-on and involved in everything. I'm always overseeing everything. It's my work. I need help to be able to realize some of this work. I like to use different technologies that I can't implement myself, but I can rely on the expertise that people have with those technologies, not to have it make the concept of the work, but to help realize the work that I know exactly what I'm going to get, what my idea can be implemented, that there's no surprise at the end.
So I think one of the interesting evolutions of your work, although we all know that your initial work, especially in the 80s, was very much grounded in art history. I think we've seen your references to art history really increase in your work. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you think about your work in art history and then the references that you make in your more recent pieces that are more direct and apparent.
Melissa, I think it comes from just the love of art. I love art about art because artists are referencing other artists. And, if you look at Rubens is always, referencing Leonardo. And Leonardo will be referencing Verrocchio. And it just, goes on and on. And it's giving it up to something greater than the self. So I'm trying to set an example of doing that. I'm giving it up to that artist, but then you're able to go into that time and you can connect to the loves of that other artist. I mentioned metaphysics. I had an experience about 6 weeks ago. I was at the Louvre Museum, and I was looking at a Uccello painting. And I thought this Uccello painting of the Battle of San Romano, and it's the evening battle. I thought, you know, I could make a painting out of this. The different harnesses that are on the horses, I could gold leaf, I could use silver leafing. And then I went back to my studio. When I got back to New York, I started working with my staff. We're looking for high-res images of the piece. We couldn't find any. We kept looking. I came back and I told my staff, I not only want to create a shelf at the bottom, but I want to create an arc across the top. And on this arc, I want to put some gazing balls. And so again, we keep looking for a high-res image because I contacted the Louvre, but it takes them about a week to be able to send the imagery to me. And so when I'm at home looking, all of a sudden I found a video from the National Gallery in London who has a Battle of San Romano also, but they have the afternoon version. And they were giving restoration to the piece, and the gentleman's there talking about how all the battles of San Romano paintings by Uccello had an arc at the top. They were arched. But Lorenzo de' Medici ended up taking some of the paintings, bringing them to his palace, cutting the tops off and putting corners in to make them a rectangle. That's the type of metaphysics I'm interested in. I'm interested in experiencing real joy and to travel, you know, to try to, and I believe it's very real. We are able to put ourselves in the different dimensions, fourth dimensions. We can experience real joy. And if I really have an opportunity to say anything here to you as this group that we're here sharing this together, we can experience real joy. We just have to open ourselves up to it. And anxiety, I think that, you know, how we get out of Plato's cave is by removing anxiety. They're kind of the shackles. And we can just walk right out into the joy. And we can have these experiences if we're open, absolutely open to everything.
I think that is absolutely the most perfect way of ending our conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. We're up to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Hello. My name is Jin-Hee Kim, and I'm with the Aspen Institute, and I'm so excited to see all of you here. Before I introduce our next discussion, I want to take a moment of personal privilege, if I may, as Melissa Chiu and I go back to our early days together at Smithsonian. I remember when she was appointed director at the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden, I thought, this woman, this person, is going to change how we look at contemporary art through a more humanistic lens than what museums have traditionally done in the past, which will help change the culture of how art is viewed across the entire landscape. And I think she's done just that. So I'm personally so grateful she came, and with none other than the incomparable Jeff Koons. I hope you enjoyed it. The next esteemed panel really needs no introduction, except to say that the sheer concentration of knowledge, experience, and insight into our world as we know it, embodied in these three speakers, is truly remarkable and, quite frankly, a bit intimidating. Please help me in welcoming our very own 2025 Aspen Ideas guest curator, Fareed Zakaria, trailblazing editor-in-chief of The Economist, Zanny Minton Beddoes, and renowned New York Times foreign affairs columnist and author Thomas Friedman.
All right. What a pleasure to be here. What a pleasure to be in the beautiful weather in Aspen. Thank you guys all for coming. We're going to launch right into it because we don't have a lot of time. I thought what I'd do is, I don't know if I'm supposed to introduce, Henry Kissinger once said, those who need no introduction crave them the most. But we are going to bet that these two do not crave them. So Zanny Minton-Betters is the editor-in-chief of The Economist. Tom Friedman is Tom Friedman. And we're going to get going. So to me, the way to set the scene for this conversation is to step back and ask yourself whether the Middle East has really just gone through one of these fundamental reorderings and reorganizations that happen from time to time on the international stage. Think about the old Middle East. The old Middle East 30, 40 years ago was a Middle East dominated by the biggest countries in the Middle East, principally Egypt, Syria, Iraq. When the Israelis did war planning, the armies they worried about were the great Iraqi army, the great Syrian army, and the great Egyptian army. If you look at the Middle East today, those countries have essentially collapsed and lost any ability to project military or even economic power abroad. The new Middle East is powered by a fascinating shift in that landscape. First, you have seen, instead of the old large countries, the new small countries dominate the Middle East. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates are much, much more powerful than they have ever been before. The world comes to them for capital. They have enormous impact and influence around the world. The second piece of this is a Turkey that has become more and more powerful, waiting on its wings. Turkey's per capita GDP has gone up fivefold in the last 25, 30 years, and it has a series of interests it worries a great deal about. And then finally, and perhaps most dramatically, the rise of Israel, which really has become the superpower of the Middle East, technologically, militarily, economically. Think of one statistic. In 1980, just when the Islamic Republic of Iran is founded, Israel's per capita GDP and Iran's per capita GDP are not that different. I think Israel was twice as large in per capita GDP terms as Iran. Today, Israel's per average income is 10 times that of Iran's. And that doesn't get into the military or technological superiority. The old issues of the Middle East were the issues between the secular dictatorships of Egypt, Syria, Iraq, battling against Islamic fundamentalists who were trying to unseat them. Today, that debate is over. To a large extent, the debate is between the functional Middle East, countries like the Gulf states, and the dysfunctional ones that remain countries like Yemen, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria. And as I said, through it all, you have the rise of an Israel that now commands the stage so much that the Gulf Arab states want closer ties with it, that its principal adversary, Iran, is now a shadow of its former self. So that strikes me as a very new world. And what we're going to try and do is explore, in the time we have, what that world looks like. So Zanny, I want you to start by talking about what could go right. We spend a lot of time in the Middle East thinking about what can go wrong, and history usually confirms that that is a useful way to think about things, because I think Richard Haas once said, in the Middle East, just when you think it couldn't get worse, it usually does. What could go right?
So it's true that in the Middle East, pessimism pays. So it helps that I'm not a Middle East expert. and certainly relative to Tom, who your career really, primarily the Middle East. I first went to Israel in 2017 in this role. As my family, who are here somewhere, will tell you, I've become completely obsessed with the region since then and have been going all over it. But I have the optimism of a non-decadal-long specialist. And I do think that there is a moment now that could lead to a very different Middle East than the one we've seen over the last 2 decades, 3 decades even. But I don't think it's automatic. The reason I think there is a moment is that I think you're right, Fareed. There is a functional Middle East that wants, as President Trump said in Riyadh, commerce, not chaos. It's primarily around the Gulf. And these countries want growing economies, they want prosperity, and they want closer ties with Israel, but we've had what has happened since October the 7th. What I think now, and why right in this moment I'm feeling somewhat optimistic, is that I think what's happened in the last 12 days is a 5-decadal change with Iran. I'm not Panglossian enough to think that this is the end necessarily of Iran's nuclear ambitions. I certainly don't think it's necessarily the end of the regime, but I do think that it has bought time, and it has bought time that, if properly used by one person in particular, and that person is Donald Trump, could actually put the region on a better trajectory. And if you look back in President Trump's first term, I think the single most impressive foreign policy achievement he had was the Abraham Accords. And I think he hasn't got enough credit for that, because people like me, people like you, we thought much of the rest of his foreign policy was a mess and dangerous, and therefore we didn't pay enough attention to just how pivotal that was. What the Abraham Accords did, as you know, is normalize relations with the UAE, Bahrain, and others, and that relationship between Israel and those countries is fundamentally different. What I think he can do now is essentially continue to put pressure on Bibi Netanyahu, and this is a big if, to end the war in Gaza, to acknowledge some framework that in due course will lead to some Palestinian entity, which will open up the normalization of relations, not just with Saudi Arabia, but before that, I think, with Lebanon and Syria. And I'll end with this. I was in Syria 3 months ago, and I interviewed Ahmed al-Shara, who is the new president of Syria, a man who 10 years ago was ordering people in suicide vests to go and blow themselves up. He was the head of al-Qaeda in Syria, and I sat opposite him. I sat where you were there. And I remember in the interview thinking, okay, a decade ago, this guy was blowing up, ordering people to be blown up. He talked to me about the future of Syria. And I thought, this man is not a Democrat in the sense that I'm a Democrat, but he is a man who wants his country to prosper. He is a man who wants, frankly, to be like Mohammed bin Salman, who also wants his country to prosper. He wants commerce, not chaos. He wants to normalize relations with Israel. Lebanon wants to normalize relations with Israel. I think this path is there if Bibi Netanyahu takes it from the strength that he's now got in Israel. And the only bit I disagree with you, Fareed, is I don't think a country with 10 million people can be a regional hegemon in the way that the US can be a hegemon. I think if you extrapolate the cost of what they did in Iran, it would be 20% of Israel's GDP. You just can't keep that scale of military effort going. But I think the path is there. The question is, will Bibi Netanyahu take it, and will President Trump push him? And it will require lots of things that you don't associate with President Trump: steadfastness, determination, willingness to engage. But it's possible. So that's why I'm feeling that there is a reason to be optimistic.
Okay. So Tom, road to a Palestinian state, normalization between Israel, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Lebanon. What could go wrong? If you were Secretary of State, how would you handle this?
Well, I say a couple things, Fareed. One is that this question of optimism and pessimism that Zania raised remind me, like 15 years ago, I was in Israel having dinner at the home of the editor of Haaretz, the New York Times of Israel, and they run my column, and they run it in Hebrew. And that means a lot to me, because I get to be a local columnist in Israel. So I said to him, why do you run my column? And he said, you're the only optimist we have. And there was an Israeli general there, Uzi Dayan. He said, I know why you're an optimist, Tom. I said, why? He said, it's because you're short. And I said, short? He said, yeah, you can only see the part of the glass that's half full. Okay, so I'm actually not that short. So since Fareed has assigned me the downside, I'm going to do it at 2 levels, Fareed. One is from American point of view and one local point of view. The way I can best express the American reason for concern is that I want to talk to all the parents in the audience right now. Mom, Dad, if your son or daughter come home from college and say, Mommy, Daddy, I want to be Secretary of State one day, tell them, honey, anything but that, okay? You can be Secretary of Agriculture, Commerce, HHS, but promise, Mommy and Daddy, you won't be Secretary of State. Worst job in the world today. Why is that? Well, contrast an October War in 1973 with an October War in 2023. Henry Kissinger, after the October War in 1973, needed an airplane, 3 dimes, and 3 months. He needed 3 dimes, a dime to call the Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir, a dime to call the Syrian President Hafez al-Assad, a dime to call the Egyptian President Anwar Sadat. 3 months, Kissinger magic, and he put together the first disengagement agreements in the Middle East, the diplomatic equivalent of tic-tac-toe, 3 across: Egypt, Syria, Israel. Fast forward to Tony Blinken. Tony Blinken saw double everywhere he went. In Gaza, he had to deal with inside Hamas and outside Hamas, military Hamas and political Hamas. In Lebanon, he had to deal with the Lebanese government and Hezbollah. In Syria, he had to deal with Russia, Iran, and the Syrian government. He saw double and triple everywhere he went. If Kissinger was playing tic-tac-toe, Tony Blinken had a Rubik's Cube, and he was trying to get all the colors aligned on one side. And if you have ever tried that, that's really hard. Promise, Mommy and Daddy, you won't try to be Secretary of State. Now, my reason for pessimism, Fareed, is very simple. To take advantage of this moment that you and Zanny have described so well, we actually need 3 regime changes. You need a regime change in Israel, you need a regime change among Palestinians, and you need a regime change in Iran, okay? If Israel has election and Bibi Netanyahu wins again, God bless him. But if he puts together this coalition again, that's what I mean by regime change, nothing is happening. This is the most radical, extreme, messianic government in the history of Israel, and this government, in its aspirations, which is to annex the West Bank, is not a friend of American interests in the Middle East. That regime has to change. Second, the Palestinian regime has to change. You need a complete overhaul of the Palestinian Authority, building real institutions around real serious people that are in that community, but this thing has gone on way too long, and it's completely hobbled the Palestinians. And lastly, you need regime change in Iran. Now, that regime change can happen gradually. It can happen a shift in the power of the elite, but you have to have a regime that basically says, we are going to be a country focused on our own internal development, not occupying 4 Arab states, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, and using our resources to basically destabilize the region. So because those 3 regime changes are so hard, but I secretly share Zanny's hope, okay, that this time might be different.
So let's drill down on one of those countries, one of those actors. As I said, the one I think that is now really in the catbird seat. And let's personalize it, because I do think the big winner out of all this is Bibi Netanyahu. And let's be honest, you had your disagreements with him. I've had my disagreements with him. He has handled this remarkably well. Put aside the Gaza issue for a moment, which is its own very complicated issue and certainly a humanitarian catastrophe. But in the north, what Bibi did was fundamentally change the balance of power in the region. He went after Hezbollah. They collapsed. turned out to be a paper tiger. He goes out, he continues the strikes on Syria. The Syrian regime collapses. He goes after Iran's air defenses. The Iranians turn out to be a paper tiger as well, can barely respond to those attacks on their air defenses, and then decides to go after Iran itself. He also figures out how to, lack of a better word, to play Donald Trump. He gets Donald Trump to support him. Trump says he wants a deal. He says, yeah, you keep trying to do a deal. And then when the deadline that Trump had set expires, this is, by the way, the first deadline that Trump has ever set where once it expired, he actually did something about it, right? He says to him, now you got to let me go. Guessing, I think, that the Israeli operation would go well and that Trump would have FOMO and, fear of missing out and want to jump in. And I think he managed all of that remarkably well. Look, he got a number of lucky breaks along the way, but I think he did the strikes as much to preempt American diplomatic action and an American diplomatic deal with Iran as Iran's nuclear weapons. He wanted to make sure that Iran does not have some kind of reconciliation with the United States, force the action, force the Americans to come in. As far as I can tell, he has handled this extraordinarily well. What are Iran's options at this moment, Zanny?
Can I just slightly
You can absolutely disagree.
With your Bibi was so wonderful take. I think success, brilliant strategy is always recognized in hindsight. And I think he got a lot of lucky breaks. I was in Israel the week before this started. And the mood amongst most of the sort of security establishment, you were there just a few days before I was that Israel was missing the boat strategically, that Bibi was mired in this endless war in Gaza with horrific consequences, which was radically changing the global perception of Israel. It was increasingly seen as a pariah state by many in Europe. It had no strategy. Meanwhile, President Trump comes to the region, he goes to the Gulf, he doesn't even come to Israel. And the view in Tel Aviv at that point was that Israel was being left behind. And I don't actually think that I think he's been obsessed with Iran. I last saw him a year ago, and I can't give you the details because it was very firmly off the record and just me, but suffice to say that for 2 hours I listened to an extremely articulate lecture about Iran. So he was very focused on Iran then. Yes, Israel did amazingly with Hezbollah. I think Syria had less to do with Israel than it did with the collapse of Bashar Assad and actually al-Shara. But in this last 2 weeks, I think he was very lucky. They went on without the Americans on board. You're right that President Trump probably had FOMO and then wanted to get on with it, but it was a big gamble. And it's one that now puts Bibi, yes, he's been very successful, but it puts him in a position where he basically can't say no to Donald Trump. And that's why I focus more on Trump than on Bibi, because I think that, for me, the most telling thing was not when he walked to Air Force One and swore in front of the cameras. It was the Truth Social post afterwards where he basically said, turn those planes around. And the planes were turned around. And there needs to be a bit more of that to push Bibi to do what you say he absolutely has to do. So where I think there needs to be regime change in the sense of dramatic policy change and coalition change. Yeah. But actually, I think Bibi Netanyahu, you know much, much better than I do, could do this because he's an absolute chameleon. He could do this. So it's not, I think it's not all due to the strategic brilliance of Bibi Netanyahu.
As Napoleon said when somebody asked him, what do you look for in your generals? And he said, one quality, luck. I like lucky generals. Tom, what are Iran's options right now? How do you look at the situation with Iran?
Well, I want to pick up on this, and then we'll go with that. Bibi Netanyahu and I do not exchange Hanukkah cards, so I have no idea what's going on in his head. But I operate out of a general principle that to understand the Middle East, I believe, the Arab-Israeli conflict, you actually have to hold three thoughts in your head at the same time. And unfortunately, that's very hard, particularly on American college campuses, okay? One thought is that Israel is an amazing place. What Israel has built in 75 years by way of technology, agriculture, ingathering of exiles. Israel's an amazing creation, okay? Number one. Number two, Israel does really bad stuff sometimes. And it's doing really bad stuff as we speak in the West Bank right now and in Gaza. And third, Israel lives in a crazy neighborhood, okay? Now, what people want to say often is, it's amazing. They just do bad stuff. Leave them alone, they live in a crazy neighborhood. No, all three are actually true at the same time. And that is true about Bibi Netanyahu, okay? He just achieved a monumental victory over some really bad actors who have perverted not only Israel, because for me, I use the Princess Di rule here. There are three people in this marriage, okay? It's not just Israel and Iran. It's Israel and Iran, and I'll deal with them as a collective. Lebanon, a country I care very much about, Syria and Iraq, who have been occupied by Iran, basically, for all these years. They are as much rooting for the downfall of the regime in Tehran as anyone in Tel Aviv. So basically, you have this sort of tripartite situation with Netanyahu, where on the one hand, he achieved an incredibly important victory. At the same time, he has pursued Hamas well after it has been defeated, at the expense of the hostages, and they are killing a lot of people in Gaza who should not be killed, okay? And at the same time, at home, he is pursuing a judicial coup to destroy the Israeli Supreme Court to pave the way for the annexation of the West Bank. So I can keep all three of those thoughts in my head at the same time, and I would urge people too when you think about him. Now, one of the most interesting dynamics, my friend Ari Shavit pointed this out to me in a column I wrote the other day, is that the people who delivered this victory for Israel, I'm talking about the Air Force pilots, the technologists, the strategists, the scientists, the cyber warriors, were for the most part the same people who on the eve of the Hamas war had spent 9 months in the streets of Israel protesting against Bibi's judicial coup. So they will be damned if he is going to take this victory that they delivered, these scientists, this tip of the Israeli spear, and use it to win the next election to produce an Israel that their kids will not want to live in. So Israel today, my fear is, just to finish this point, Israel today is the country the Iranian middle class wants to be, and Iran today is the country the Israeli secular elite fears it could become.
So let me push back on personalizing it with Bibi Netanyahu, because I think what has happened in Israel is a much broader shift. The Israeli political spectrum has moved significantly to the right over the last 30 years. And perhaps it began with Camp David and the Palestinian rejection of the offer. I think a lot of it had to do with 1.5 to 2 million Russian Jews who came to Israel. A lot of it had to do with the growing religiosity of the Haredi. But as a result, I am not sure it's fair to say that, Israel would be willing to make peace with the Palestinians, have a Palestinian state. It's just Bibi Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. I think Israel, not Bibi, Israel is currently not willing to solve the Palestinian problem. The Palestinians, God knows, have their own issues with their leadership. But I think it's going to take a lot more than a few changes in the coalition to get something going on that very fundamental issue.
The polls absolutely affirm what you say. Clearly, there is not support within Israel for a two-state solution. And two-state solution has become essentially shorthand for failed policy since Oslo. And no one sees that as the path forward. But I don't think the alternatives are that or the kind of messianic view of Smotrich and his co, which is not, it's basically annexation of the West Bank and resettlement of Gaza. And he is, by the way, a kind of mild-mannered in his demeanor and completely crackers when you talk to him. But those aren't the only options. I think there is a large swath of Israeli society which would not be in favor of anything like Oslo, not be in favor of an imminent two-state solution, but can see a framework that allows some kind of autonomous entity for the Palestinians that has Israeli security first and foremost. And October 7th was understandably, of course, an absolute sort of psyche-shaking event. I mean, I lived here in 9/11, and just remember how 9/11 changed this country. And this was just so much more horrific than in scale relative to the population. So I totally understand why the country feels the way it does. But I think increasingly there is a view within Israel that there has to be a path forward, that it has first and foremost Israeli security, but then has some kind of framework towards something that is autonomy. Don't call it two-state, but call it something that allows not the PA, but some kind of less corrupt, more effective Palestinian authority to have some form of self-government.
Okay, so we always end up discussing the Israeli-Palestinian issue, and I don't want to get away from Iran, which is the crisis at hand. So, Tom, how will this play out, do you think?
On Iran.
On Iran.
Yeah, well, I've been to Iran twice, and both times I wrote about it, even when I was there, Fareed. This was in the late 90s. There were debates in the parliament every time I was there. Why are we giving money to Hamas? Why are we giving money to Hezbollah? Why are we in these stories at all? There's a huge Iranian, middle-class desire, to be a normal country. I think right now you're going to have a real debate inside between what Zanny and I were talking about, backstage, between the guys with the guns, okay, and basically the more moderate engagers, as it were. And this is not a regime that's going to be forced out from the bottom up. They will kill as many, they've proven that since 1979, they'll kill as many people as they have to. But it can split at the top. And there can be a faction of the Revolutionary Guards that says, you know what, I see our future with the more moderate. The question is, how do they interpret what happened? Do they interpret what happened, this is what happens because we didn't get a bomb, or this is what happens because we spent all these years trying to get a bomb? And that debate will take a long time. What I fear, though, Fareed, is that it's not going to be pretty. Right now, we had an amazing story in our paper this morning about just the witch hunt going on in Iran for who were the spies and who worked with Israel. No one trusts anybody. Yeah. Can you imagine being at the Iranian cabinet meeting, and wondering who is working for who, and that's not conditions for clear thinking and trusting people. And the best way to delegitimize your opponent is to say he's working with the Jews, I would just say one thing on the Palestinian thing, because I think it's important to pick up, and I share Zanny's view on this, which is that my view, I've been advocating a two-state solution, by the way, all through this war, and people criticize me, are you delusional, to which I say, look, I realize it has about a 5% chance of success, but I'm going to give 100% of my energy to that 5%, because I'll tell you what the alternative is. It's not a one-state solution, not a three-state solution. It's actually no states for two people. It will be an ongoing war, basically between 9 million Jews and 8 million, and that will be actually no states for two people. And so I think, though, we cannot go from here to if Henry Kissinger were alive today, he wouldn't be saying, okay, now land for peace, where's the border going to be? We now need a peace process for the peace process. And that's what I call Palestinian institution building for Israeli restraint. Palestinian institution building with clear KPIs. Do this, you had to achieve that, you achieve that. And on the Israeli side, a complete and total freeze on settlements outside the block areas that would be preserved for a Palestinian state. That's where I would start.
Okay, so it seems to me that one interesting kind of optimistic note one could end on is, if you think about the energy of the Gulf states, the degree to which they really have become vast pools of capital with small countries attached to them. These are basically hedge funds with small countries that are attached to them. And what they want is peace and stability. They want economic opportunities. And that is a very different narrative, master narrative coming out of the Arab world than has come out for, think about, the days of Pan-Arabism and Nasser, the days of Islamic fundamentalism, and the Saudis' support for all of that. Now what you have is, a Saudi Arabian crown prince who is basically trying more than anything else to modernize his country. You know, Trump gave that speech about how, you know, thank God you're not listening to outsiders. Actually, the entire Crown Prince's plan was drafted by McKinsey. I mean, literally, the Saudi Arabian government has been McKinsey's largest client for the last 10 years. So it's just a different set of Western consultants who are now kind of rewriting the plans for the Middle East. But in a way, it's a note of optimism. And in a way, we forget, even going back historically, it is a chance for the Arabs to finally claim their own destiny. You know, this is a part of the world that was dominated by the Western colonial powers, but before that, for 500 years, was dominated by the Ottoman Empire. I mean, the last time the Arabs really ruled themselves was 1,000 years ago. This is, in a sense, their second chance. The last thought.
Yeah, just one piece of evidence for precisely that, which is a small one, but I think really important. The person who was most influential in ensuring that President Trump lifted the sanctions on Syria, which, having been there, was, if it hadn't happened, Syria would be in utter collapse, was Mohammed bin Salman. It was Saudi Arabia played a pivotal role in convincing Donald Trump to lift those sanctions. Saudi Arabia is becoming, and goodness me, he's had a checkered history, MBS, but it is now becoming a force for stability, a force for it. He has this vision, and everyone wants to buy into this vision. That's what Al-Shara wants to do. There is a vision of, as President Trump said, commerce, not chaos. And it's not inevitable, but it is a vision that I think it's actually very helpful that the President of the United States shares. He cares about real estate and he cares about commerce. This is a fortuitous coming together of the two of these. And that's why, actually, I am optimistic. And I will, you know, I hope I'm proved right. And probably I'll be proved wrong. But I do think the potential is there. And we could come back in a couple of years and we could have the biggest progress towards real stability in this region than we've seen in a long time.
I want to give a shout out for Zanny's optimism, but let me start back. I got hired by UPI on Fleet Street in 1978. Yeah, do the math. I'm 71. So, and the number 2 man in the Beirut bureau of UPI got shot in the ear, and they said, "Would you like to go to Beirut and replace him?" You know, and me and my little wife from Des Moines, Iowa, went off to Beirut in 1979. These are the first 4 stories I covered: the Iranian Revolution, the takeover of the Grand Mosque in Mecca, the signing of the Camp David Peace Treaty, and the inauguration by Queen Elizabeth II of a port called Jebel Ali in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. Little did I know that those forces, the forces of resistance and the forces of inclusion that were born there, would basically frame my entire career up to today. And that's how I see basically the struggle globally. You know, what was going on in the world in 2022? Basically, Ukraine was trying to join the West, the European Union, and Israel was trying to join the East, normalizing with Saudi Arabia. Russia stopped the first, and Iran stopped the second. The question is, can we now overcome those 2 breaches, and basically tilt the world toward this world of inclusion that you both described so well, against the world of resistance? That's the struggle. And it's a very, very big struggle. But it starts with our president understanding that Russia and Iran are in the same camp in this war, okay? And one isn't just, sort of a little misguided, okay? Iran was providing the drones that Russia used to kill Ukrainian civilians and democracy. So if we want to win this war globally between the forces of inclusion and the forces of resistance, we better know who's on whose side, starting with our own president.
All right. We got to close on that note. The task at hand is to find a ladder that even if Tom Friedman were to get on that ladder, the glass would still be half full. Thank you all.
Thanks, dear. That was good. That was really good for you. Really good. Really good.
Thank you so much to Zanny, to to Fareed, and to Tom. My name is Graham Veazey. I'm the executive director and the executive producer of the Aspen Ideas Festival. Thank you for being part of the 2025 gathering. So this is a unique day because it's the only time that you have folks from Fest 1 and Fest 2 show up, and then some of our public ticket buyers. So welcome. And we're so happy to have Fest 1 concluding and Fest 2 starting. The point of the Aspen Ideas Festival is to have all of you leave here more inspired to have a greater impact on your communities and the world. And we do that through dialogue, we do that through roundtables, we do that with visual art, and we're about to do it with performing art. And we're really excited to have the 2025 Harmon Eisner Artist in Residence, Teddy Abrams, joining us, along with Academy Award-winning composer and filmmaker Chris Bowers. And the history of the Institute, dating back to 1949, was also the history of the Aspen Music Festival and School. We're kind of fraternal twins, if you will. And so we're in the Klein Music Tent. The original tent in 1949 was designed by Eero Saarinen. And then in the 1960s, Herbert Bayer designed the tent that lasted from the 60s to the 90s. And that was when Harry Teague, who was a protege of Franz Benedict, who was a real consistent collaborator with Herbert Bayer, designed the tent that we're in today. And so to fill this tent with music, please all give a large Aspen Ideas welcome to Teddy Abrams and Chris Bowers. Come on out.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's such an incredible honor to be here with the great Chris Bowers. And I'm very lucky to be the artist in residence at the Aspen Ideas Festival this year. And we are going to be doing a little bit of experimentation, but just before we do that, a little bit about myself. I am a conductor. I'm the music director of the Louisville Orchestra, and let's hear it for Louisville in the house, I'm guessing, or at least Kentucky. And possibly the reason I'm here is because much of the work that we've done in Louisville is centered around bringing the state of Kentucky together, using the power of music to literally unite Kentucky, to address issues like the urban-rural divide by bringing our orchestra to every part of Kentucky so that we can find accord, we can find harmony, and a way forward as Americans. So that's the project that I've been working on over there and bringing to Aspen. And now, Chris.
Yeah, thank you all so much. It's great to be here. I'm primarily a pianist and a composer for film and TV. I work on shows like Bridgerton and movies like The Wild Robot and King Richard and Green Book. Awesome. But I'm also a storyteller and a filmmaker. And as a composer, I became a pianist and a composer because it was the way that I learned how to express my emotions in spaces where I didn't feel like I could do that verbally when I was a kid. And in making films like this film called The Last Repair Shop that I made about the music instrument repair shop in LA that repairs all instruments for LAUSD public school students, our mission in promoting that film all the way to the Oscars and promoting that shop is talking about the fact that music is there to create better humans, not just better musicians. And the idea that we can use music to have people help them find their own voice and help them express their emotions. And so I feel like that's the reason why I'm a musician and the reason why I continue to do what I do.
And now we're going to be doing a couple of tunes. This is really improvisational.
Yeah, it's very improvisational.
We're making this up on the spot. This is all, I guess, together, right, as an experiment.
Yeah, I mean, we met like literally an hour ago. So
okay, exactly.
It's not even kidding.
We shouldn't tell you that after.
Ladies and gentlemen, Teddy Abrams and Chris Bowers, thank you gentlemen so much. So we've got the third and final dialogue of the day with CBS Evening News anchor John Dickerson interviewing Coach Steve Kerr and Governor Wes Moore of Maryland. So we will strike these and put it out. I want to point out one of the artistic interventions that we've got at this year's 2025 Aspen Ideas Festival. CJ Henry, who's an Australian artist, was commissioned to do a zero-waste installation in tribute of Elizabeth Pepka. Elizabeth Pepka was Walter Pepka's wife. She went by Pussy, and she was the one that first came to Aspen in the 1930s when there was plumbing issues at their ranch in Colorado. And then in 45, she saved her wartime gasoline rations and brought her husband Walter here. And they said, this place is full of possibility. She also brought to this valley her love of wildflowers. And so CJ has planted in Anderson Park these flowers. Yesterday, it was the state flower of Colorado, the columbine. Today, it's the black-eyed Susan. I see some in the audience. And tomorrow is going to be an Indian paintbrush. And those are all varietals that are part of the Elizabeth Pepka Memorial Garden. What's exciting is that any of the unpicked flowers, you're all encouraged to actually pick them. You'll bring them home. If you don't deflate them, you'll actually bring the mountain air with you home. But you'll be able to be part of CJ's exhibit, and as this is part of the 75th anniversary celebration for the Institute. The other component is any unpicked flower will get repurposed and made into a Bauhaus-inspired piece of furniture that will be part of the permanent collection of the Aspen Institute. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce a corporate leader in America and somebody who represents one of the oldest partners of the Aspen Institute. In research for the 75th, I got the original program guide from the 1949 Goethe Bicentennial. And when you open up the page, you can see that one of the foundation officers and directors was James Barker, the chairman of Allstate. And so it's my distinct pleasure to introduce the current leader of Allstate, a longtime supporter of not only the Aspen Institute, but the Aspen Ideas Festival. Please give a warm welcome to Tom Wilson.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, bud. Well, good afternoon. I should be clear, I've been at Allstate a long time, but not 1949. So this section is leadership that lifts us, and my goal is to enlist your leadership to help turn around the precipitous decline in trust in America. I don't trust you. That's a harsh statement, and one I don't believe. But it, however, is a common emotion felt by Americans about each other, about leaders, and about institutions. We don't trust our government, we don't trust our businesses or our educational institutions. Only 41% of Americans trust other people to do the right thing. Local relationships have declined, so less than half of Americans wave or say hello to their neighbors. And on top of this, 3/4 are concerned about the cost of living, 72% about the state of our country, and 64% about the safety of their family and loved ones. This is a problem. The political philosophers, Locke, Rousseau, and Hume, believed that trust was the foundation for society. Lower trust is slowly destroying the future of our children, our families, and our communities. So we need less blind trust and more authentic trust. Blind trust is dangerous because it's about denying facts to maintain beliefs. Authentic trust, on the other hand, is created by relationships with reciprocity and predictability. It's not about agreement. Authentic trust is necessary for us to be a functioning society. Trust is also necessary for one of the most basic American desires, which is freedom. Like, it frees us up to try new things, meet new people, have new experiences. So, what do? The Aspen Institute is taking the initiative to improve trust in America. That said, it takes all of us. You have the power to change the world, the power to create a better future. To harness that potential, we must rebuild community relationships and amplify the positive. There are strengths to create a turning point in trust. 74% of Americans are optimistic about the future of their community. 2/3 are involved in community organizations. So, think about it. If you're putting down sandbags, or you're making sandwiches, or coaching baseball, relationships are built, and it's outside of political ideology or educational background. If you have a relationship with someone, you're much more likely to trust them. Trust can also be focused by focusing on the positive. We're trapped in a web of negativity. Negative communication in America far outseeds positive. If the net negative messaging in America were an advertising campaign, it would be bigger than the top 15 advertisers combined on an annual basis. It's a campaign of us, against us, by us. So this creates anxiety, which makes it hard to trust. It clouds our vision and keeps us from being who we were meant to be. Trust is not about ignoring reality. That would be blind trust. It's about rebalancing the positive and negative in our lives. Being more positive will help us accept individuals with different views and approaches. You live this, right? Acceptance leads to acceptance. Respect given leads to respect received. Acceptance and respect are foundations for authentic, trusting relationships. Restoring trust is a door we must go through to address the many issues in America. It's necessary for collaboration, for innovation, and creating solutions that are both accepted and work. It's a door to realizing our full potential. It's also a door that's not only good for America, it's good for our own well-being. We just feel better. So your leadership can help us cross that threshold. Leadership, I believe, is about getting others to willingly go someplace they would not go by themselves. So help rebuild local relationships, give positivity a voice, I trust you. I believe you'll create a better future. So let's make the world better, one relationship, one positive thought at a time. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dan Porterfield, President.
A big thank you to Tom Wilson and Allstate, who walked the walk of partnerships and trust. They were sponsors and partners of the original 1949 Goethe convening, and that's how long the Aspen Institute and the Allstate Company have been a marriage of true minds. Now, our next panelists need no introduction, but one of the privileges of my role is every now and then I get to welcome to the Aspen stage people who are personal heroes of mine, and in this case, we have three. So the first is John Dickerson, the CBS Evening News anchor, who is also a musician and a writer, a Renaissance man with a true gift for drawing out others. He'll be in dialogue with Wes Moore, who I've known since he was 20 years old and a senior at Johns Hopkins University. Wes, who is the governor of Maryland and has served in our armed forces, led a nonprofit institution and worked on Wall Street, is one of those that the poet W.B. Yeats referred to as, quote, that passionate, serving kind. Joining Wes and John is Golden State Warriors head coach Steve Kerr, who I've admired since I was in my 20s. He is a 9-time NBA champion as a player and a coach, a 2-time Olympic champion, including head coach of the 2024 gold medal American team, and an introspective leader with a very strong moral compass. Please welcome our panelists to the stage.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Steve.
Wow. I know, it's for real, right?
It's for real.
What? No piano? Welcome, everybody. It's delightful to be here with all of you, and I'm excited to be here with the coach and the governor, and I know what you're saying about me. He's the athletic one. Allstate CEO Tom Wilson just challenged us, and so I'm going to put you guys to work before we go up to 30,000 feet and talk about leadership in the abstract. What Tom challenged us to do is to restore trust. Well, that's a big goal in our society, but he also said we all can do this in our individual interactions. So, Coach, I'm going to start with you. You don't have to tell me why we've lost trust or anything, but how do you build trust in your relationships, whether they're personal or in work, or what's one thing that you do?
We just talk all the time. We build relationships, and
Hold on.
My mic not working. Is that better? Yeah. So I played for Phil Jackson in Chicago. This is kind of going in and out. Phil used to say, I think we should work on the mic here, it looks like, probably. Yeah.
One of the great
How's that?
skills,
Is that better?
Yes.
All right, there we go.
Leadership requires adaptation.
So, no, we talk. We have a lot of conversation amongst the group, relationships. Phil Jackson was an incredible leader in Chicago, and he taught me something that no other coach had really taught me in my career, and that was that if you just get together every day for 15, 20 minutes, and you can even just lie to the players and say, we're going to watch tape, but you don't have to watch tape. If you're just together, then you end up talking and you end up communicating. And this is a habit. This has to be every single day. For me personally, I'm checking in with our players individually. I'm touching base with them, but it's really about the group communicating together every single day and talking about a million different things.
Governor, what's your suggestion for building trust? How do you build trust?
I would say the way you build trust is you struggle. I think people who you struggle with, you build an innate sense of trust with. Where, you know, and I know in the Army there's this expression where you say, you know, embrace the suck. Because when you're with people who you embrace the suck with, then those will be your people for life. And because I really do believe that when you watch people sacrifice, and when you watch people work hard, and when you watch people in some of their most challenged moments, and you watch how they perform then, you watch how they adapt, you watch what happens when the heat gets turned up, and you watch them perform in that moment, and you watch who stands by their side during those moments. I think that you then are verifying in the mind of your entire team that, you know, when things get really difficult and things get really complicated, and undoubtedly things are going to get very difficult and very complicated in all of our lives in some way, shape, or form, that really helps you to figure out who are the people that I want to my flanks when things get really challenging. So I really think that the best way you can build trust is find ways to struggle together. Find ways to get uncomfortable together, because that's when you're going to really see and understand somebody's mettle.
Sure. Our goal today is to talk about bold, purposeful leadership. How does that start? Coach, I'll start with you. I mean, is there a skill, is there a way to intentionally give a good locker room speech before you go out into the game, to set off a project?
Well, I hate to disappoint all you Newt Rockne fans, but that's like the least important part of coaching is the pregame pep talk.
That's worth knowing, yeah.
I think coaching has gone through a paradigm shift over the last 20, 25 years because we know a lot more about human psychology. We're more advanced. We're more mindful of what makes people tick. You know, when I was growing up, Bobby Knight was kind of the most dominant, literally and figuratively, basketball coach in college basketball. And I mean, he had a style that was grating, now, to say the least, but he stood for something. And, you know, every parent in Indiana wanted their son to go play for Bobby Knight, despite the fact that he had this incredibly harsh way about him. But he stood for something that was really important. The best coaches now, in my mind, and I'll put Phil Jackson and Greg Popovich in there because I'm a little biased, but also very fortunate to play for them. Pete Carroll comes to mind. I think there's a complete shift in coaching philosophy, and it is one of collaboration and trust and mindfulness, connecting with people. We've realized that motivation by humiliation isn't really that effective, you know? And so I'm proud to be part of a modern crop of coaches that is really trying to connect with people and with players on a very deep emotional level and not just yell and scream at them.
So it happens long before you ever get in that moment, before you're going out onto the court.
Oh, yeah. No, it's every single day. And I'm not saying that these coaches didn't exist. I grew up going to UCLA games, watching John Wooden work his magic. Probably the greatest coach of all time. Yeah. And I played for Lute Olson at Arizona, who was just amazing. But the thing that ties all these great coaches together is there's a code. There's a what do you stand for? And you knew playing for these guys what mattered, what the values were, what we were trying to accomplish, and that's what I've tried to carry over in my own coaching.
Governor, how do you set the heading for things that are going to be difficult and tough in a political context, or when you're in the other parts of your life? How did you set the heading for your team?
First of all, it's like so crazy sitting next to Steve Kerr. I mean,
it's kind of crazy for me to sit next to you too, just so you know.
Literally 25% of all the NBA championships he's been a part of or helped to lead. This is it's actually insane. Yeah, for real. You know, I always think that when we go through the process of team building, and you think about what exact components are you looking for? And I know we had to do it because, when I became the governor-elect of Maryland, I'd never held elected office before in my life. I literally ran from I was in the military, I was in the business world, I ran a poverty-fighting organization, and then I don't know, I was like, I think I want to run for governor. And we just ran an interesting kind of campaign, and we ended up winning. But the thing about it was, when I then had to go to Annapolis, it's not like I can bring my team from City Hall. Right. Or I could bring my team from a county capital. Like, I had no team. And so, but actually it was a great experience because it actually gave you the chance to say, if I could build a dream team, what does that look like? And for me, frankly, it did not mean I want people who have 15 years of experience in Annapolis or this person who's worked for 4 governors. In fact, frankly, my team has like none of those things. I wanted to find the people who were the top social entrepreneurs, the people who had run social service platforms, the people who were CEOs of businesses and organizations, but people who fundamentally had humanity at the core of what they did. People who, because it's like, listen, I can teach, and I knew that we would go through the process of learning every single thing that you needed to learn about all the basics and mechanics, right? You can teach that. But someone is going to go the extra mile. Someone who is going to, if you're putting together a child poverty platform, who's actually going to go into communities and make sure they're actually talking to people. So you're actually knowing that the people who you are trying to serve, that they are part of the conversation and not just subjects of the conversation. Like, those are the people, that's the stuff you can't teach. And so I wanted to make sure that you had a focus on, were people technically competent? Were people hard charging, because that's kind of the nature of how we roll? But also, most importantly, are they going to be individuals, and are they going to be people who understand that we, in essence, are in the people business? And you cannot be in the people business if you cannot relate to people. And so that was the thing that I really wanted to make sure that was really at the heart and the foundation. That, for people who are raising their hands to serve, that you never forgot, because, if you never forget who you're fighting for, you're not going to stop fighting for them. Right. And so that's what I wanted to make sure was the foundation of the team that we built.
Well, sure. It just occurs to me, you two are experts at leading, but in your experience, Governor, was there ever a moment where you handed over your trust, when you were coming up, where you said, I'm going to put all my trust in this person who's leading me? Because leaders need followers. Yeah. So was there an instance where you said, I'm going all in, and what was it that you got you to go all in?
Yeah, I think that for so much of all of our development, there are those moments. I know there were coaches that I played under that I was all in for them. That there were things my mother was like, listen, you got to go to bed at a certain hour, you got to eat vegetables. I was like, yeah, okay, that's cool. And then when my coach told me, I was like, 9 o'clock, like, coach tells you that's what you got to do. So I think that part of development has always been that there is that innate level of trust that you turn over to people. I think what though happened after, as I got older and really started getting more mature in my thinking about it, was I was still always able to, and you still have those moments where you say, I am putting my full trust and confidence in this person, but it's not because of a title.
Sure.
It's because they've actually earned it.
Yeah.
Because you've seen them, you've had experiences with them, that you realize that type of respect isn't something that comes with, how many bars they have on their shoulder or how many stars they have on their lapel. But it really became because that was a person whose leadership showed me enough that I can put my full faith in that person and know that at the end of the day, I'm moving towards the best result because I fundamentally trust who they are.
That's right. Coach, weigh in here. Was there an instance when you were playing or in your life where you handed over your trust because somebody drew it out of you?
I was never a good enough player to not hand over my trust to my coaches. So
please take my trust.
I think it's one of the beautiful parts of being part of a team that actually has a clear vision and a chance for success. And when it happens, it's hard to quantify it. but there's a magic about sports, art, music, literature. There's a magic that happens, and when you're part of it and you feel it, it's incredible, and you automatically just go, yes, I'm in, you know. But the question is, how does that happen? And you can't duplicate it year after year. You try to, and I think what I've learned is that you have to maintain your values through the thick and thin. You know, one of my, I'm not going to say it was one of my favorite years, but one of our most important years with the Warriors was 5 years ago, the COVID season. We had the worst record in the league. We lost all of our players to injury. I think we won 20 games out of 82, literally the worst record in the league. And our staff and I tried so hard to maintain our values and the vibe that our players would feel every day coming into the gym, because we knew, like, your values are most important when things are going terribly wrong. And at the end of the year, we ended up having to trade 5 guys, and 4 of them came to me and they said, "Coach, we don't want to go. Like, we want to stay." And it was very sad, but it was also kind of a proud moment, like, because usually when you lose every game, guys want to get the hell out of there, you know? And so these guys wanted to stay, and the vision for what we were doing, which that season, which was trying to develop our young players, get them ready for when we were going to be good again, we won the championship 2 years later with some of these young guys playing really important roles. It was a great reminder to me and to all of us that, you know, even or especially when things are down here, you got to keep fighting and keep your values strong, keep your conviction for what you're trying to accomplish, and things are going to turn back the other way.
So the scoreboard is not the only metric. The scoreboard is not the only metric, because there are some people, the score says, you know, the score tells you who you are.
Well, and I'm aware how lucky I am, because a lot of times coaches in that situation would get fired. You know, and so it really does take an entire organization of people who trust each other and communicate. And I think that's a big part of my job, is communicating up and sideways, and not just with my players, and developing that trust so that we can get through the tough times.
Governor, in politics, there's also a scoreboard. Yep. You either get elected, it gets passed, it doesn't get passed. In politics, is success the only metric? And is that the metric you use to motivate? Or what do you keep score by with your team as you try to do the work you're doing?
That's a good question. The scoreboard that we keep is, did you keep your promises?
To yourself or to the people?
To the people.
Uh-huh.
That you know, and we keep a very active chart about what are the things that we said we were going to do, and did we do it? You know, when we talked about, you know, so for example, you know, we said that we were going to focus on and really create pathways, for example, to work, wages, and wealth for the people in our state. And, you know, so we have been we are very intentional about making sure that our work is actually correlating to, in 4 years, can you turn around? In my case, it's 568 days, because I keep a clock that sits on my desk, and I got 568 days in my first term. I'm going to run it back, and I'm going to run for election in 26. But did you keep your promises? And so we can look back. So right now, for example, where we talk about work, where we said we're going to make sure that we can get more people inside of a workforce, and you know, we've done things like, you know, we've increased apprenticeship and trade platforms by 722%. Within our state, that we have created the first service year option in the history of this country, where every high school graduate in our state now has a chance to have a year of service to the state of Maryland that gets them into the workforce. That we knew there were challenges that were, you know, that there were barriers, for example, misdemeanor cannabis convictions that were keeping people from entering back into the workforce. And so I signed the largest mass pardon in the history of the United States, where I pardoned 175,000 misdemeanor cannabis convictions to get people back in. That if we said we were going to focus on work and getting people in the workforce, if we're going to focus on wages, and we ended up raising the minimum wage, because people should not have to be working jobs, and in some cases multiple jobs, and still living at or below a poverty line. And when we said we're going to focus on wealth, and that means increasing home ownership, et cetera. So the reason that I laid that out is because that's our North Star. Mm-hmm. Those are our benchmarks. That's a promise that I made to the people. And so when we go back around, when we talk about, numbers don't lie, check the scoreboard, those are the type of things that I want to make sure that they're able to see and say, I could agree, disagree with the policies, but one thing I will always give that administration is they kept their promises, and they did what they said they were going to do.
Coach, when you were in that period where you had the worst record and you were trying to stick to your values, you talked about leadership that is more empathetic, more in touch with your players. Does that include and does it allow for you to say, hey, I'm scared here too. I might get fired. This is awful. This is not why this is not why I'm in for it. Or is that too much? Can you still maintain the coach role and also be basically honest? I assume you weren't gleeful that the scoreboard was ending up the way it was.
I mean, I think, one of the things we try to do, especially with our young players, is we teach them right away. Here's the deal with the NBA and professional sports. You get paid a lot of money. You get to do something you love, right? And it's awesome. But you're going to get injured, booed, traded, cut. Your career, on average, is going to last 4 years, and then you got to go do something else. There's a lot of reality that has to be expressed. And so the young players need to learn about the league, and the message is that you are your own best asset. And then the trick is to understand, for these young guys, many of whom aren't going to college, they're playing maybe 1 year of college, you have to understand that to be your own best asset, you also have to commit to the group and not necessarily yourself. So that's a tricky needle to thread, right? But the older guys, they understand that. And if you have great internal leadership, like we do with Steph Curry and some of our other guys, there's kind of an education for the younger guys about what this league is about. And when I give that talk, I tell them, I'm in the same boat. I could get fired. The average NBA coach lasts 2.5 years. And if I didn't coach Steph Curry, I would have lasted 2.5 years. So kind of part of it.
It's funny. When he said you'll get booed, you'll get traded, your career lasts 4 years, I thought he was talking about politics.
Yeah.
Sounds like a Wednesday for you.
Yes. Thank you for that segue. Oh my gosh. This is like, I feel like we're engaged in some sport because you both are in high-profile professions where the tiniest little thing, and now I'm going to address the question to you, Governor, the tiniest little thing gets picked apart. They go right to your heart. They tell you it's because you're weak. It's because of all these things. How do you manage it? Two things. How do you just keep your head right? And secondly, how do you lead people and say, keep your eye on the prize, don't listen to the noise, just do what we're supposed to do?
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes people will say like, oh, did you hear what so-and-so said about you on, Twitter? I was like, no, because I don't go to Twitter. I mean, I'm just a big believer in this idea that, don't let people that don't matter too much matter too much. And I just feel like we spend like this inordinate amount of time on things and on people and on foolishness that they are doing it for clickbait. They're doing it for their entertainment. They're doing it for their advancement. They're doing it because they like looking at how many likes and whatever you get. But it is not just it's not just distracting. It's also something that I think is just deeply disruptive if you actually care about the work that you're doing. Dr. King, when he wrote in a letter from a Birmingham jail, where he's sitting in a prison in Birmingham, and he reads this op-ed from this group of clergy, talking and calling his actions untimely and unwise, and so on and so forth. And when he writes this letter that famously turned into a letter from a Birmingham jail, he actually starts it with something that I think is actually so important. He said, if I responded to every single piece of every negative thing that was said about me, I and my assistants would never have time to actually do the work. Mm-hmm. But he said, but because you all are people of faith, I'll take my time to completely dissect and pick apart and demolish your entire argument.
And say something that could sustain for 70 years and be quoted by you.
but there is something to that, that, if we spend our time trying to, if we spend so much time on things or people that don't matter too much, then I think you are never going to actually do your job and do your work, which is why people actually have you there in the first place. That's right.
I think what you're saying is just get off Twitter. Just don't read the comments. You know? I mean, it actually is a real problem, right, for every one of us. And it's not just people in the limelight with jobs. It's for teenagers in school reading the comments. I mean, it's the mental health of our country is under assault by some of the discourse, and it affects our team in a dramatic way. Every halftime, I walk in, halftime, not before the game, I walk into our locker room, every guy's on his phone. And a lot of them are looking at the comments.
And you got people betting on your games, trying to get in their head.
Don't get me started.
Sorry, I just had to, let's go back to optimism, because you're right. Twitter essentially allows the regular person to experience the directed hate that you guys experience because you're both public figures. It's really wonderful. Coach, I interviewed Sunny Williams, the astronaut, who had an extended stay on the International Space Station, and on her spacesuit, she had the word "believe" from Ted Lasso. When you get in a situation where you're up against it, when you're feeling challenged, what do you turn to? Is there a word, a memory, a saying?
I would say humor. Everybody responds to pressure differently. I was not a player who naturally responded well to pressure. I was thinking too much about the outcome instead of the process. It took me half my career to understand that I had to immerse myself in the process and not think about the outcome. I don't think Steph Curry has ever thought about the outcome as he goes through his incredible array of shot making. And that's a gift. Michael Jordan was the same way. Like, the lack of fear of failure is something I could only dream of, And so I think breaking through to each guy, for me, is a matter of perspective and humor and the reminder that what we do is, we're so fortunate to do it, but pick up the news, read about Gaza, read about Ukraine. Like, if we lose this game, I think we're going to be okay,
Yeah.
So how do you,
Coach, do you...
But, goddamn, I want to win so badly, So how do you, do you find that balance? And I think the best coaches I had, Lute Olson, Greg Popovich, Phil Jackson, there was this amazing sense of perspective and joy and humor and competitive desire all mixed into this cauldron. And I witnessed it, I observed it. It's exactly how I approach my life and my job. And it's really helpful that, honestly, that Steph Curry shares, I think, the exact same values and perspective. And so the fact that we've been able to work together and we share these values has just been an absolute godsend for me.
Yeah. Governor, is there a thing you turn to, a person, a saying, a memory in these moments when you might break down and look at Twitter and let it affect you, or Yeah.
I think my grandparents. My grandfather was a minister. My grandmother was a school teacher, and I always say my grandparents both had deep Jamaican accents. My grandfather had a very deep Jamaican accent, and he was maybe the most patriotic American that I've ever met in my life. And right before I left for Afghanistan, they actually gave me a little Bible. It was like one of those New Testament, the little green ones. And I would stick it in my flak vest before I went on every mission. And in the front of that Bible, they just wrote 4 words. They wrote, "Have faith, not fear."
Have faith, not fear.
Have faith, not fear. And I used to actually literally recite that before I went on every mission. I'd be literally sitting in the back of like a Chinook or a Humvee's like, "Have faith, not fear, have faith, not fear, have faith, not fear." And just trying to control my fear. And, but I think those have been some of the most important words that I've managed to live by, because I just feel like in the times where I have let fear kind of lead me, and that's why I love your point, Coach. At the time I've let fear lead me, the result has never turned out to be good. And at a time when I was just like, listen, I'm letting faith take over.
Yeah.
On this one. The results always ended up a little bit more positive than I could have hoped for.
People say hope is not a strategy, but in a way that is hope. I mean, you are hoping in things unseen. You are having faith, not fear.
Yeah. But also, I do think there is this idea that it's hope, but I think part of the power, and one of the reasons that, again, I love what Coach is talking about, where faith alone is not going to do, like his team's put in the work.
Yeah.
And so when they get on the court, it's not, they don't believe they're going to win because of faith. They believe they're going to win because we've worked harder than the other team in preparation for that moment. And so I do think it goes like, in fact, going back to biblical passages, it's this idea about, faith is important, but faith without work is dead.
Yeah.
Right? And so if you put in the work, and if you do what you need to do, then I think, faith is going to be important. But the reason that you can walk around with supreme confidence is you can say, no one has worked harder.
Yeah.
And I'm ready for this moment.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about that work ethic, Coach. Snoop Dogg, of course you expect me to quote him, said, "Stay ready, you don't have to get ready."
There you go. Go ahead, John.
So,
hey.
Can I get a witness? Anyway, Coach, give us something that would be really surprising about basketball that is a part of being ready. So if you want to be a good writer, questions are the key. That doesn't have anything to do with words or typing or in the moment you're sitting in front of a computer, but if questions are always going through your head, you'll be better when you get to the computer. So what is it that you need to get ready so that when you're on the court, you are ready?
Well, I'll give you a quick story about Greg Popovich, and I'm going to veer back a little bit to leadership principles, but he was a master at empathetic honesty, which is it's a great phrase, empathetic honesty. It's better than brutal honesty, but it's the same thing, right? If you know how to deliver the truth, it's amazing how powerful it is, and I think it's one of the best qualities of leaders. So I had a stretch in San Antonio when I was playing for Pop where I wasn't in the rotation. I had fallen out of the rotation. I'm not playing. And sometimes NBA players have this thing where they, instead of, if they're protesting a little bit, if they're a little upset about their spot in the rotation, instead of sitting on the bench, they sit on the floor, And it's a very subtle protest, right?
Sure.
But I did it. It was the first time in my career I did. I was pissed. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm not in the rotation. So I sat on the floor for a couple games. Pop pulled me aside, and he goes, hey, listen. Didn't say it in front of the team, but he just said, hey, listen, the reason we signed you is because of who you are, your character, what you bring to a team. And I see you sitting on the floor. That's not who you are. You're a sit-on-the-bench guy. You're a pull-for-the-group guy. Yeah. And if you sit on the bench, you're going to be ready for when your time comes again. And I was like, oh, God, he's right. And it was such a humbling moment, but such a beautiful moment, too, because we're all human. We all get disappointed. We all have a tendency to let our guard down. But if you're busy worrying about your own plight, your own stuff, there's no way you can stay ready. And so I talk to my guys all the time, and I really connect more with guys 8 through 15 than 1 through 7 because I was 8 through 15, And I talk to them all the time about this concept of stay ready, your chance is coming, your chance is coming. And in an 82-game season, it always does. There's just attrition and injuries and everything else. And so a big part of my job and our players' job is to understand what that means to stay ready. It's emotional engagement as well as the physical aspect of it.
Oh, I love that. Governor, when do you know to yell, or do you never yell?
No, I yell. I don't know. I mean, there's definitely not a moment where it's like, okay, in X situation you yell and Y situation you don't. I think what it is there always has to be, even when you will raise your voice, I believe a really important component of leadership is still control. And I actually think that there's two things that happen when you find leaders that are constantly yelling and are constantly loud. One is it's actually less effective because people essentially start drowning you out. And the second thing is oftentimes yelling correlates with lack of control. That the people oftentimes when you are yelling and screaming, what's coming out of your mouth is actually not helpful.
Right.
And so I do think that, there's definitely times when you're going to get upset. There's definitely times you're going to get frustrated. There's definitely times when you feel like what you asked for is not happening. There's definitely times and that's just natural, that's just human instinct. But the reason that I'm always careful on yelling is because I think in many ways you lose the plot. Mm-hmm. What is it you're actually trying to get done? What do you want them to receive? What do you want them to do? How do you want their behavior to change? And I just believe there's a lot of ways to do that where people will sometimes have meetings with me and there is no question, they walk away completely understanding the assignment. And they understand what I'm looking for, and you did not produce what I'm looking for. And let me be very clear, and I'll say it one more time, this is what I'm looking for, right? So I get that, but I am careful on the idea of the people who are just constantly yelling, because oftentimes it's not just that people will block it out, it's that people then eventually will forget what you're actually trying to say in the first place.
Yeah, sure.
And you're not going to actually accomplish anything.
I want to ask you something, because I believe in the same thing, but I also believe in the you got to yell at them one time a year theory.
You got to let them know.
Yeah.
Collectively or individually, you got to yell at them?
No, as a group.
As a group. Okay.
Yeah. But no, I think it's similar. It's kind of, this is like being a good parent.
Yeah.
It's like what you really want your kids is to just fear that you're going to yell at them.
Healthy dose of fear.
Yeah, you don't actually want to yell at them, but if they just think so. I don't know. It's not when we yell at people in modern coaching. It's not like you're not dehumanizing people. You're yelling about the product, what's happening. So it can't be of a personal nature like it was 50 years ago. Right. So there's a different sort of tone to it. But I absolutely believe, and I think this goes back to what you were saying, control. Like, I am all about collaboration and humanity and really empowering our guys. But if they don't think I'm in control,
that's right.
Then I'm in big trouble.
That's right.
And so how do you find that balance? I think that's what leadership is.
Right.
That's exactly right.
I'm going to ask you both a version of the same question. You both lost your father at very young ages. Governor, I'll start with you. Explain how that affected you, and then tie it to this. How much I was introduced to this idea many, many years ago at Aspen by David Brooks, the idea of living to your eulogy, not your resume. When you leave your legacy, that you think more about your eulogy than your resume. So, thinking about having lost your father at a very young age, and thinking about the legacy you want to leave behind as a leader, what thoughts do you have about that? And you're getting the same question, Coach.
No, it's true, because I have two memories of my father. He died in front of me when I was months from my 4th birthday. And the second memory that I have was when he died in front of me. And so I feel like at a young age, I got a very clear understanding of life's impermanence, and that nothing is promised. And I think it has helped to drive and guide me, because like when I'll hear people talk about, well, I'm going to do this in 5 years, and I'm going to do this in 10 years, and 15 years I'm going to do this, I literally just think to myself, like, who promised you that? Who did you talk to? Because I know I've never talked to anybody who said, you know, hey, Wes, you've got 5,614 days left, so pace yourself. That listen, life is, there's an impermanence that comes to it. And I think the thing that I've kind of learned from it, and the way I think it's helped to guide me, is I really do try to believe and live in a way that I think he would be proud. That, you know, I'm proud that I have his name. I'm proud that his DNA runs through me. I'm proud that I can try to carry on a legacy that he first, that I hope that he first believed in. And so I guess when you talk about the eulogy, I just really hope, because I really do believe that one day I'm going to see him again. And I just hope that the time when I get a chance to see him again, that I know we'll be able to look at each other and he can say that, you know, you made me proud. And that's what I hope for.
Well, I'm going to connect these last two talks, but my dad, some of you know the story. My dad was the president of the American University in Beirut, and he was assassinated outside of his office in 1984. Tom Friedman was in Beirut at the time and frequently had dinner with my father and my mother on campus at the American University. Tom has been a great friend ever since, and every time I pick up a paper and read Tom's columns, I think of my dad. And I'm basically in the family business. He was a teacher. Coaching is, teaching. Slightly different. My dad was trying to solve the Middle East peace process. I'm trying to beat the Clippers on Thursday night. So, but I do carry on my dad's legacy, I think, in a lot of ways. I think about him all the time and the way I try to lead. He was incredibly caring about all of his students, his faculty, his family. So that's how I feel about life. You care about the people around you. Can you make an impact? Do you care about your community, your team, your people, everybody? That's how I look at things.
Coach Kerr and Governor Westmoreland. Thank you, gentlemen.
What a pleasure, man. What an honor.